Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. How are you all doing today? It's another special day on the channel. Ryan's back, and we are here to talk books. Hi, Ryan. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this one.
So Ryan and I actually haven't seen each other in a while. We just had dinner last night. It had been a bit, so we've had some bookish catch up that we have been doing ourselves. But for us, very exciting. One of our favorite authors has just published his third novel, The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor. And we both happened to read it at the same exact time. And we thought, what a better time to discuss it when it's fresh in our brain. And it just came out last Tuesday. And we're going to see Brandon in person on Friday, June 2nd. So that's really exciting.
Super exciting. This is one of the most anticipated books on my list of the year. I really liked his previous novel, Real Life, which came out in 2020. That was one of my favorites. Filthy Animals was also very, very good. That was more a collection of short stories with some elements woven through them. But yeah, this was definitely high on my list. I'm so glad we both read it at the same time.
Yeah. So, as Ryan said, The Late Americans is Brandon's third book, and then his first book, Real Life, gets shortlisted for the Booker Prize. So, and then he wins the O. Henry Short Story Prize for Filthy Animals, and now his third book is out. So, I don't know about you, but I think we both agree he's one of those authors that we just want to pick up everything he writes. Like, we're just totally invested.
Yep, definitely.
So yeah, this book just came out. Ryan and I are going to try to talk about it. We're not going to try to spoil it in this entire video. We apologize if something sneaks in that you find spoiler-ish, but we're going to try not to. And we're just going to sort of talk about how we feel about it and all of that. But Ryan's going to start by trying to summarize just what the book is about in general, and then we'll go from there.
Right. So this book is a little harder to describe than some more traditional books. It doesn't have a really strong plot that drives like the story and pulls the reader through. It's almost like a collection of short stories in some ways. And these stories follow a group of creatives, mostly I think in graduate school in Iowa City. And there are a lot of queer characters and some other characters that all interact in this small town in Iowa through, knowing each other and their shared creative endeavors. There's groups of dancers, there's poets, there's painters, I don't think any writers, but it's a really great group. And it's really about their relationships.
Yes, yes.
This is a more character-driven book than anything else, I would say.
Yeah. So I was sort of thinking about this. This is a little bit, if I was trying to align it to other things that I've read, but sort of like in that Olive Kitteridge world, or like that sort of thing where it's a bunch of different characters in the town, and through each of the chapters we learn more about them individually, but they sort of like move within each other's spheres. So you see people again, but they may not be the focus as they were of a previous chapter. But then you get some more backstory as they interact with other characters throughout the book.
Right.
Which I think that's where we'll start, is just the structure of this book. You sort of said, I think Brandon Taylor's sweet spot is sort of this interconnected short story, but overall tale of a group of people. Like, he does it so well.
Yeah. His way of creating these characters and like putting them in these moments is just really good and just so compelling. Way more compelling than I think if somebody was like, this is what happens. You'd be like, I don't know if that would work. It does work, and it works really well. And so you get this novel that focuses on these characters. It's not a thriller. It's not a mystery. It's not what happens, what comes next. But there is like a sense of tension, and there's a lot of conflict, and there's these characters that are not totally great people, but you sympathize with them and their struggles trying to go through that. I think that's brilliant the way he does that. And I was so impressed by this one.
He has a way of writing people that they are complicated, they are real. I mean, it seems weird because real life was the name of his first book, but all of his characters have a real sense of place and time. Like I feel like I could have known
Mhm.
everybody in this book. And I think some of them to me just seemed so three-dimensional by the end that I was like, and you learn more aspects of them as the book goes on. So you start to put together the pieces. Not only you talked a little bit about it's the relationship that they have with each other, themselves, and also the community that they live in, and sort of how the this university affects sort of the day to day of everybody else that isn't part of the university life, that I thought was so well done. There's a complexity to that because really it's just about relationships in every day and all of that kind of stuff, which in the wrong hands could be rather mundane. But as you said, Brandon does a great job of making this tension out of stuff that we as people have dealt with, which I just find amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, he puts these characters in these little crucibles, and he almost, I don't want to say pits them against each other, but he puts pressure on these characters in different situations. And it's so compelling the way that these characters interact. It feels so human and so relatable in a way, but also some of them are not great people. And I wouldn't want to hang out with them. But like, I like it because it's interesting and it makes for a really good novel.
Yes, yes. Um, let's just talk about how this book starts, because I think for both of us, it sort of was one of those moments where we just realized that Brandon writes dialogue and conflict in conversation so brilliantly. We have Seamus, is that how you say?
I think
How do
it's
you say his name?
Seamus.
Seamus without the H. Okay. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
terrible at names. Forgive
It's
me.
it's like Sean with
Oh,
the
you're right.
SEAN. I'm sure it's Irish.
There you go.
One
He
thing
is
that
a
always cracks me up about his books are the number of weird names. In
yes.
this book, you have Seamus and Fyodor and Hartius and Olafur, and I just love them. I'm like, yes, make everybody have a weird name, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And Seamus is a poet, and he starts the book in a graduate seminar where he's there with other poets reading each other's work. And his interaction with his fellow poets was at times hilarious and cringeworthy and so spot on in how Seamus was like sort of analyzing this poetry and making commentary about the world in general, that I was just like, oh my gosh, it was just a scene I could have eaten popcorn and watched the whole thing.
I think the scenes in the poetry workshops were probably my favorite because they were so uncomfortable, but yet so funny. And I mean, I have to believe that Brandon Taylor got this from the Iowa Writers Workshop seminars that he attended. I remember hearing on a podcast once, he talked about like how it was just brutal. Like these people talk about your work and you can't say anything and you're supposed to just listen. And he would spend his time doodling, just like, trying to like make it through like 3 hours of criticism. And that so came alive and it was such a farce. And it felt real, but you're like, why would anybody subject themselves to this? It was so absurd in its own way. It was great.
And he did such a good job of capturing like the sort of that idea that some people have about art, where it's like it's put out there and the sacred nature of it, how you can't attack it because it reflects on this part of a person's life or this part of a person's history. But as you're sort of learning about it, you're like, this is like the most absurd thing that's been put out there in the world. But then like the people who are like staunch defenders of it, like that animosity, well, again, cringeworthy, but so enticing. Like it was like so well done. It reminded me a lot of the dinner scene in real life. The
Yeah.
That he just creates these like moments that and things that are so real, but they are so versatile in how they make you feel.
Yes. And then this section goes from the poetry workshop to the kitchen at a hospice where Seamus cooks for these people. And there he has an encounter with somebody, which, whoa, that was like, it was like 180, uncomfortable in a totally different way. Um, but like so well done and so just fully capturing this Seamus character in a snapshot.
Yes. Yeah, that I feel like that first chapter stood alone. Like it almost was like its own short story. If you had read that on your own, it would have been a perfectly rewarding experience.
Mhm.
That we get more of Seamus later, get more of the people he interacts with later. Um, Only added to the sort of the feeling of it all. But that first section was so strong.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was amazing. It really was amazing.
Yeah.
So I think I heard on a podcast once where Brandon talked about how he doesn't write for certain gazes, like he just writes really for himself and who he wants to represent. And I really felt that in this book. This was to me his most unapologetically gay book. Like all of these gay characters had so much FaceTime and they got
Mhm.
really deep and they were real and complicated, and a lot of the stuff that they deal with, it was very much part of like being part of the gay community, especially the gay community in a small town where everybody knows everyone has had an interaction of some sort with someone else, and using sex as almost what's the word I'm looking for, currency in a lot of ways. I just thought he did a really good job, not of taking the gay community and placing it here and making it almost universal. Like I think these people could have existed in a lot of different places, but in this sort of fishbowl effect, we got to see all of that really well
Right.
done and complicated.
Yeah, I think in some of the other books there was a bit more about coming out, which is like, the common trope for gay literature. And not just coming out to other people, but like coming to terms with it yourself.
Yeah.
And I felt like that wasn't really used here. There's one character I could think of that was like self-loathing about it, but like for the most part, it was like nobody explained that's who they were. They didn't have to tell anybody. It was just kind of accepted, and um, it was just a part of life. This you could have just written this group about straight people and not talked about straightness in the weird way, in the
Yeah.
same way. And so I think that was really well done too.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And I don't even know, like you and I could talk about so many different aspects of this book, but I do want to talk about how well he also represents sort of the clash between economics and socioeconomics in this book. One of the characters, I think his name is it Timo? I'm totally
Yeah.
blanking. Is he's in a relationship with a guy who works in a meat plant, right?
Right.
But say his name. It starts with an F.
Fyodor. Fyodor.
Theodore, which he's probably one of my favorite characters in the whole book, because he was just very like real to me. Like I felt like there are gay men like him in the Midwest, and I hadn't seen them represented on the page this way before. But what I thought was really well done was Timo was a student. He sort of had a different sort of perspective on life. Fyodor is like a working man. Like, he is exhausted at the end of the day. He has the calluses on his hands, and they're trying to make this relationship work. And sort of the conflict between those two perspectives on the world. I just thought that was really interesting. And Fyodor, and the way that Brandon made what he did for a living, you know, chopping meat down into the things that we buy in the grocery store, but there was such art to it, and the way it was described was so beautiful in such a horrendous way that I was really impressed with that whole relationship and sort of what Brandon was doing with it.
Yeah, I think that was really well done because a lot of novels don't really get into the politics of sex and money in a relationship, and this one did.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to see how the the disparity between money really affected their relationships and what happened. It was very, very interesting and very sad and complicated, but I really enjoyed reading about it, even though it wasn't pleasant at all.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing. There was so much of this book that was uncomfortable, but I could not stop turning the pages. Like, I just was
Yeah,
so in awe of the word choice and the way that these people were coming to the fruition. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. So,
yeah.
there are a lot of dancers in this book as well.
Mhm.
People who have chosen dance as a career that are going to leave this graduate program and hopefully become part of dance troupes. That's probably not dance companies. That's probably a better word.
Yeah.
People who are leaving dance, like majoring in dance, but know that that's not their future, which I thought was really interesting. And then we even have one character who left dance before college because his body gave out and now is in finance, which I thought was really interesting because it wasn't only like sort of this commentary on dance, it's sort of this commentary on art and people who choose art as a way of life. And after graduate school, I'm sure many of them don't become the artists that they thought they were going to be, and they go into
Mhm.
different jobs and maybe they stop pursuing their art. Others sort of have to, you know, get in the trenches. And I thought he used in this book dance as sort of a metaphor for all art and sort of
Mhm.
the difficulties of pursuing that as a way of life once you're out of school.
Yeah, I think it was definitely one of the most interesting aspects because it's not just about, like, can you make it as an artist? The poets didn't have to worry about that. They could write poetry forever. The dancers had a very fixed timeline where their body was eventually going to fail. And so there was this really strong suspense of like what is going to happen. And I think that was just so interesting. The the dancers really highlighted the financial aspects too. If you could pay for dance school and to kind of like make it through auditions and all that, then you're much more likely to be a success. Where the people who come from nothing and have to work the whole time, like one of the characters, Fatima, works in a coffee shop, and they talk about her like she's so noble for working at a coffee shop, but she's just doing it to live. And then when she goes to practice, she's exhausted because she spent all morning at a coffee shop. So there was a lot of commentary about art and the availability of art and who is able to participate and who's not, and what is the cost, not only to financially, but to your body.
Well, and she was so interesting too because she also was a sort of this depiction of the difference between men in art or men in dance
Right.
versus women in dance, and some of the stuff that she has to deal with, which we will not spoil here, but the men did not have to deal with it. And so
Right.
it was so well done. You're right. Like they were almost like, well, if you don't dedicate, there was one character was like, well, you can't work full time and be a dancer. You have to sacrifice
Mhm.
the work for the dance. And as if he didn't realize that if she did that, she would not be able to even survive. Like that was,
Right.
and it was so fascinating. Sort of, she as this symbol of like, she sort of showed how everybody looked differently at dance from an economic standpoint, from a ethic standpoint, and also from a gender standpoint in a lot of
Right.
ways. So, and she was sort of at the end of the book. Her story was sort of at the end of the overall novel. So she
Mhm.
wraps up a lot of what has been talked about throughout the entire
Mhm.
novel in a very, very good, well done way. I really enjoyed her story too.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about this, it's interesting to look at like the sacrifice that is a theme through the book. A lot of people, a lot of these characters have to sacrifice in some way. Um, one, Fyodor works in a butcher slaughterhouse or whatever, which can't be pleasant. Fatima works in the coffee shop. One guy does like OnlyFans videos or whatever, or like post videos on Twitter. Another character like hooks up with his landlord to get like cheap rent. Like it was all about like what do you do to succeed and like make it in the world, and who doesn't have to deal with that. It was it was a very interesting theme that kept returning throughout this whole book.
Yeah, absolutely. We could spend an entire video talking about the relationship between the character, I can't remember his name, I think it starts with an N, but him and his relationship with his landlord, because
Oh,
we see the
yeah.
landlord elsewhere as well. And that character is very, very complicated. You know, he's a local, he is in the closet in a lot of ways. His father's, it's just very interesting that in a
Yeah.
short book, Brandon created an entire world full of very complicated people. And you could dissect so much about the world itself through the pages of this book.
Mhm. Mhm.
I will say, I think I don't know that this book will be for everybody. You and I are Brandon Taylor fans. We absolutely love him. I think when he writes, he just writes books that we love to read. You or I, we don't need a lot of plot. We don't need, we're not going to be the one that reads the book that goes A happens, B happens, C happens. That's not what we need. This book is very much about the people and the atmosphere and the language. So if
Mhm.
that's not your jam, Brandon Taylor might not be for you. But if you just want to see someone who uses the power of words to sort of dissect the world and people
Mhm.
and create relationships, he's that writer for me. He just does it in a way that I think is just so unique and so brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. I I hope a lot of people give this a shot because I think it is eye-opening in a lot of ways, especially if you haven't been in some of these situations, in graduate school, in a small town, around a lot of queer people. Like, it is, I think we mentioned before, like, very unapologetic. It's not trying to cater to anybody. It's not painting anyone in a false light that these people are good or holy. It's just very honest and real, and I think that's the appeal of it. It's just beautifully rendered, and you can see the effort put into making this what it is, and I think it's incredible. I hope this gets recognized as much as his other books.
I totally agree. And I think having, we both read all three of his books, it just watching him develop as a writer has been, and I'm sure a lot of this was written at the same time, all three of these books. They came out all very close to one another. So, but I think this book just takes him to that next level. And I can't wait to see what he does next.
Right.
because his trajectory only shows the growth in his art in a way that is really quite fun to be a spectator of.
Definitely.
So, well, Ryan and I both 100% recommend Brandon Taylor's The Late Americans. We're both 100% behind this. If you want to talk in the comments below, we'll discuss the book with you as much as possible. It is out now. You can get your hands on it. Brandon is on his tour, so hopefully you can find him in a city near you. We will be seeing him in a week now, and we can't wait. And so, Ryan, thank you so much for being back on my channel.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun. I hope everybody goes out and buys a copy of this one.
Yep, we highly recommend it. So, and then until Ryan and I read a book together again, happy reading, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.